you've seen, the patterns before, and you've been dealing with different countries on policy. So we as businesses, I'm going to speak for our members, and I know we're going to step up. There's no question about it. But what kind of partnerships, where's the hope, and or are we doomed?
We are absolutely not doomed.
Oh, good.
Absolutely not. I mean, we humans have solved huge issues in the past, maybe even bigger than these. I mean, you are a girl of the American South, even a planter from the American South. At one time, slavery, we tend to believe slavery was just in the United States. Slavery was all over the planet. It was seen as the normal way of organizing societies, basically everywhere. Christian priests said this is in the Bible. Muslim mullah said this is in the Quran. And the economist said the British Empire, which was the real empire of the day, will go down and under if we are not allowed to have slaves. Well, then some people raised their hand. There happened to be Christians in London, the first of them, and said, but is this really in the Bible? Is it really true that we cannot organize a society without slaves? And then, of course, political leaders like Abraham Lincoln and many others picked up the fight. And today, there's not one place on the entire planet where there's legal slavery. Some people are living in very, very horrible circumstances, but nowhere you can send the police to bring your slave back to your farm. Nowhere. And that's just one. Take another one. We are now bringing 130,000 people out of poverty every single day on planet Earth. 130,000, which means one Vancouver every 5 days are brought out of extreme poverty on planet Earth. So the direction is the right one. We are solving many problems, but we have the huge environment challenges which we need to now attend much more to. Climate change, the destruction of wildlife, the wiping out of many species, and pollution. Pollution is now the biggest killer of humanity. So how do we do that? Well, we need a new way of organizing the economy, which will bring us the jobs and the economic growth, while at the same time not cause the problems. And that's, of course, the shift from polluting energy into the renewable energies. From the wrong way of organizing transport into the right. China in 2008 had no high-speed, environment-friendly rail. Now China has 29,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. They are close to 70% of all high-speed rail in the world. China has 99% of all electrical buses on the entire planet. There are many more electrical buses in some Chinese cities than in entire Europe and North America combined. So change is happening. We just need to scale it up and speed it up. And I will be happy to speak about how we do it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm going to actually derail you a little bit, because one of the one of the things we're supposed to be talking about here is circularity. So the whole, part of the new business models and the way we approach things, certainly energy is one of those elements. But when you think about the bigger picture of how we encourage a new business model, some of the infrastructure that's needing, how does policy play in, the policy perspective when we talk about circularity more specifically?
I think circularity, while it's maybe a kind of intellectual concept, which is not so easy to bring to people out there unless we bring it into practical thought, is the key concept. Mahatma Gandhi, who was just 150 years anniversary of his birth, once said that the planet has more than enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. And I think circularity, if you look to it, that's how people lived in all historical societies. My mother hardly threw away any food. My grandmother never, ever, it could be as horrible taste as possible, but she would never throw away, because she still knew the time when they didn't have enough food. And that, of course, is now not any longer the case with nearly anyone in Europe or North America or in China. But it's still the case in some other parts of the world, for sure. So we need to go back to that, but in industrial modern form, to the time where we just didn't throw away. Look to this. We really want new cellular phones. We want to have the new technology, absolutely. We want to have new fashions. There's no way you can get people to say you can just be happy with your 10-year-old phone. It won't work that day. But of course, there is no reason why we cannot use the components of the cellular phone again and again. The minerals in the phone can be reused. We don't need to go to Congo to grab new minerals every day to produce our Samsungs or Apples, but it can be reused. But then you will probably need much more a dialogue between the big, the cellular phone industry is probably the easiest one because at the end of the day, there are only 3 players: Samsung, Apple, and 1 or 2 Chinese companies. They are totally dominating. So a dialogue between these companies and political authorities as to how we structure the market so that it's easy to recycle will be a very promising way forward. The companies need and they ask for that political dialogue and that political kind of structuring of the market. Of course, the fashion industry is much more complicated because there are so many more actors. But I think every single person in this room understands that we cannot continue to throw away 99% of all clothes we make. That's what we're doing at the moment. 99% of all we make, hard work in China, Bangladesh, and many other places, enormous amount of companies bringing these to the world, but it's just thrown away. That must change, and we must see this as a raw material for new either clothing or other products. And again, there may be a need for a dialogue between governments and the business as to how that can happen, because we want to make those who are on the front line, we want to fame them, make them have better markets, make them sell more, and those who are in the back seat should sell less. And you need to make ways of giving a premium to those who are leading the change. That's what we have done. In Norway, we now have the highest number of electrical cars anywhere in the world. How did that happen? Well, the governments regulated the market so that it was a premium for buying an electrical car. More than half of all cars bought in Norway last month were electrical, more than half. So it just shows the power of the government to regulate markets, because it's not less business, it's just another business. The same we need to do with plastics and with fashion.
Well, that's exactly because money talks, and money does expect to be listened to. So you've got the investor groups that have the money, and of course the banks that lend the money, and the cost of using money, and then the implementation of the infrastructure that would need to, the investments that are being made. So when you think of policies that could help spur the right kind of investments, tax incentives, like preferential tariffs, or other mechanisms, market mechanisms that can support the companies that are doing the right thing, tax the ones that are creating the others. What kind of models have you seen that have been, you just referenced, the electric cars, that there's a tax rebate there, and there used to be tax rebates on solar systems. So what role can governments play in the creation of the money side of things and putting some incentives there?
I think we need both initiatives from business and from government in parallel. Business initiatives need to be supported, and civil society should do a lot more of naming and shaming, naming and faming. Those who do well should be famed. People are very reluctant to do that, but that needs to happen, because not all customers are environment interested, but if 20% are and 20% are ready to buy the product which is a little bit better from an environment point of view, it has a huge impact on markets. But then people need to know, so civil society, media, and others and government should be encouraged to fame those companies who do well. Then there needs to be a dialogue between the business and governments about what regulations work, because governments tend to put forward in most nations regulations with, frankly, not really deep insight into the business. And that's because in most nations there is a very, very strict divide. In my nation, Norway, basically at the age of 25, you make the choice, either you go for the private sector or for the public sector. Very few people jump from one to the other. So public sector guys are sitting there believing that they are a bit cleaner, nicer, and more environment friendly than business, and making regulations which they think will work. And then, of course, business tend to react negatively because this may not work. So there should be a lot more dialogue between business who would know what regulations which will work and government. But let me give you one practical example of what has worked very, very well in my nation, Norway. At some point, we realized in the Norwegian government that we were far behind on NOx emissions. We had not lived up to any of our international obligations. We needed to do something. Well, then the Minister of Finance said, let's put a flat tax on all NOx emissions. That will resolve the problem. Then surprise, surprise, the fishing industry, the ferry industry, all those with the NOx emissions said, no, 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 don't do that. So we were stuck. Then we did something very differently. We put a levy, a tax on NOx emission, but in a zero-sum game where every single kroner or dollar coming in from that was pushed back to the same business, to those companies who were in the forefront of the change. Meaning that those who were changing had a double benefit. They paid less levies because they changed, and they got the benefit of support for the technological change. Those in the backseat had a double cost because they paid more levies and didn't get the support for the change. And now, frankly, I mean, not to boast too much about Norway, but I think we are far ahead of any other nation when it comes to electric ferries. We introduce electric ferries at our coast nearly every week, and it comes a lot back to this system because it was so lucrative for the business to change, and then they change. And now they are the drivers of the change.
If you had one charge that you were going to give to us as a community, what would that be?
Let me remind you, because most people in this audience are European and North Americans. 10 years back, we Europeans and North Americans thought we need to run around the world finger pointing to the rest and educate them to be environment friendly. That was what happened in the Copenhagen Climate Conference in 2009, which was a complete disaster. But forget that. Change is now coming, yes, sometimes from Europe, but to a large extent from Asia. Just we Europeans in our arrogance haven't really detected it. So when RGE, which is a company founded by a Chinese who went to Indonesia and now headquartered in Singapore, a true Asian company is driving the change. So don't fool yourself to believe that change is not coming from Asia. As I mentioned a number of facts from China and India to underline how fast change is happening there. And remind yourself that China, India, and Indonesia combined is 40% of humanity. So it's the producers of a lot of the garment from China, but also the market for the future products, and also the nations will drive a lot of the change. So my just appeal to Europeans and Americans, don't be arrogant, don't trust your own self-confidence, but reach out to Asia in any sort of partnership for change. Yeah, true. It's of course sometimes easier to say it than to do it, but I think initiative here should come from governments. You need government leaders who understand this. You should vote for government leaders who really want to work with business. That's the only way you can green government leaders who can work with business. And then business, of course, are competitors normally in the same sector, but they still have a number of common interests. They need to define those interests and then go to the government and tell the government, this is our proposition for how you can regulate the market so that we see a faster change. My view is that we are on the right track. We are past the kind of bottom plank. We are past the point where coal was dominating our electricity. We are moving in the right direction. We're bringing people out of poverty. But there is scale and speed, because problems are urgent, so we need more scale and more speed. And then business should really come together to discuss between themselves what are the way government should regulate the markets, and then go to the government and initiate that dialogue.
I would also just step in here too in our role as NGOs, that a lot of times, many times, it's about voluntary regulations that we work together as an industry toward common standards, for example, or harmonization of policies, that you're finally able to group together and say, here's a recommendation that we can make as an industry. So I know, 20 plus years ago, there was different organic standards all around the world, but it took a concerted effort for harmonization of standards and to get together so that there's one basic understood organic standard all around the world. But that's, for food, it's a required standard. For textiles, it's still a voluntary standard. But I think that there's a lot to be said for the work that we're doing as a community, and that feeds into the NGOs, and the NGOs then can be a part of educating policymakers.
No, I mean, absolutely. It's the only way conservation in reality can work. Conservation can never work if someone coming from outside into a community and tell people, please conserve the forest. People need to see the advantages. Let me give you a prime example of advantage. In Rwanda today, which is a poor nation in Central Africa, if you want to see the gorillas of Rwanda, you know what you need to pay? You need to pay $1,500 for one person for 1 hour. So if you are a family of 4, you need to pay $6,000 to see the gorillas for 1 hour. It may not be fair, but it creates a fantastic economy for the people around there, for all the taxi drivers, hotel owners, restaurant owners, and for the government of Rwanda. So of course the people in the neighborhood are the first defenders of the gorillas. They will give their lives for the gorillas, while in the past they may go for bushmeat with the gorillas, because it's such an enormous positive. And that's an extreme example, but still there are many, many more examples of how you can combine conservation and social and economic uplifting of people. That's the only way it can work. Brazil, until the present president, was a prime example. The deforestation rate in the Amazon went down to 20% of what it was, thanks to very good policies of the different governments, not just of the Labour Party with President Lula, but also the government after that. So it was enormous success. But it shows, of course, the importance of policies. Creating jobs, finding products which can coexist with nature, going into ecotourism, all those avenues for creating value and jobs for people living in the front line, as you say.
I'm also going to add that I believe it's really important and goes to the heart of our opening plenary this morning that we've got to get from a price paradigm to value paradigm where, you know, the commercial goods that are coming out of that, the herbs we're gathering in natural forests, there's, you know, the other alternatives represent the real intrinsic value. And so that's a real challenge, the economic equation. Everyone kind of talks about it, but how do we get across that threshold of paying a fair price that creates that fair wage, that living wage? I don't know what the appropriate language might be in the different regions, but the farmers, you know, cotton farmers and the herb farmers and the sesame and the wheat, you know, and even the wool and the cashmere, we've got threatened indigenous cultures because there's not fair prices, and so all of a sudden I'm buying twice the amount of goats so that I can have, you know, enough money to support my family, and now I'm overgrazing and contributing to desertification. And so there's a big challenge here on making sure that we're paying a fair price that goes back to stabilize the economic side of this circularity equation. So challenge everyone to figure out what that business model is for that.
This also may be easier also with modern technology. Blockchain may be a tool for this. Apps where when you go to buy, say, H&M T-shirt, you will be able to track the entire history of that T-shirt back to, say, those ladies in Bangladesh who produced it, and you can get some information about that they got a good salary, which is not a salary which they would have got in Sweden, but which is a decent salary to survive in Bangladesh.